So we are here with Al Kelly, who is the executive chairman of Visa. You are the former CEO, and also you're the co-chair of the corporate host committee of the Apec CEO Summit, where we are right now. So can I start, first of all, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
I had a great conversation with you this morning, and I'm very intrigued by what Visa gets out of Apec. Let's just start with this odd collection of 21 economies, which are united by the fact that the Pacific Ocean hits their shores.
Well, an organization like Apec and this event actually does us a big favor. They're convening, they're doing the heavy lifting and convening a bunch of people from 21 different economies around the world, all places we do business. So it gives us an incredible opportunity to be very efficient, and in the course of 3 or 4 days, touch base with clients and with government officials from all of those various economies, and think about the time it saves us in terms of traveling around and seeing people. It allows us to continue conversations that we've been in with them over the years, and in some cases make new friends and initiate new conversations. So for us, these kinds of forums for a company as global as we are really are extraordinarily valuable in terms of us being able to get together in tight periods of time with many people from a number of countries.
I think it was 4 billion consumers. How many people have Visa at this point? I think it's probably...
We're over 4 billion credentials. Many of them are cards. Obviously some of them are now digital, but yes, we have a big footprint around the world.
Big footprint. So you made an announcement about this $100 million investment, small micro businesses. Talk more about that.
Well, it's actually a pledge from our foundation, something I'm very proud of. When I became CEO, we didn't even have a foundation, and now we have a foundation that's over $400 million. So we're pledging $100 million over the next 5 years, focused on the APEC economies and specifically focused on underserved and often women-led small businesses. No matter where you are in the world, small businesses are the very, very important engine of the economy. They produce lots of jobs. Often small business owners are supporting multiple members of their family. And we just think it's extraordinarily important to help them and uplift them. And in doing so, we try to digitize as many of them as we can. And what that does, it shrinks the world for them. And it allows them to reach potentially more consumers, more buyers outside of the little town or village that they happen to be doing business in.
So in essence, a lot of this will be spent on bringing these small businesses online to give them access to bigger markets, to give them more efficiencies, or where do you see a lot of the money going?
I think it's still, TBD in terms of exactly how it happens. I think some of it we will do directly in terms of working directly with small businesses, but for the most part, Diane, what we find is it's better to work through local organizations on the ground that also convene these organizations and have much more knowledge of the players and of the needs, because the needs could be a little bit different from country to country or even within a country. And we find that working with local players often facilitates a better answer and a better outcome for everybody.
You mentioned earlier incredible access to policymakers here, including heads of state. Obviously we have President Xi, President Biden coming. Talk about public-private partnerships, even in the context of what the foundation is doing. Do you see a role for government or policymakers in this context where you have $100 million to give out? What should policymakers think when they see that sort of commitment?
Well, I think that governments around the world, especially since COVID, have become very sensitized to A, the importance of payments, and B, the idea of extending and expanding digitization around the world. During COVID, many countries around the world actually started distributing stimulus money or relief money through players like us, through prepaid cards, for example, as opposed to just sending out vouchers. Even in the United States, that happened for millions of people. And as a result, they're now trying to take a leadership role because they see how digitization can help them in numerous ways. It's much more efficient to do this through third parties like us that have a broad-based and secure network. They're also seeing it can help increase the transparency around tax collections. They see it as a big help in transit. Many of the transit systems around the world historically have been closed loop, meaning you're a stranger in the country and you've got to figure out how to get a card that allows you to get on the subway.
Yeah, everything's localized.
Exactly. We are now trying to compel and having incredible success compelling governments to go open network. And that takes them out of the infrastructure business, and it makes for a much greater experience for the local person and especially for a foreigner to a country where they can just use their Visa card to tap to get onto the subway or the train, and it's much more operationally efficient for the government. So governments are really leaning in more than they ever did, and I think they want to set an example, they want to help themselves, and I think that therefore them staying knowledgeable about what we're doing and what they ought to be doing, and we have lots of interaction with them. We actually even have a group at Visa called Government Solutions, so where we're actually treating the governments around the world in many cases as clients. So I think the role of governments and the private sector working together is critical. The challenges of the world are too great, and when we talked earlier this morning, I made the point that 2 billion people on the face of the earth, almost 25%, live outside the financial mainstream, and it's our job collectively to try to work with governments to try to see if we can bring more people in and include more people in the financial mainstream.
Now I know I want to distinguish there's politics and policy, and sometimes policy can be much more stable than the politics, but there's a lot of discussion here of politics and certainly a lot of what happens with the conversations between US and China. How important is that to the business community in terms of getting your job done and meeting your goals?
Well, I think that the fact of the matter is the United States and China, newsflash, are hugely important economies around the world. And I happen to believe that it's one thing to have our national security interests, which are extraordinarily important, but I think there's a great deal of dependency upon one another from an economic perspective. And the reality is that I think that the world will feel better if the relationship between the US and China is constructive. Might not be perfect, but if it can be constructive. And I've been a big advocate of pushing for more dialogue, and I'm very, very happy to see President Biden and President Xi sitting across from one another, 20, 25 miles south of where you and I are talking right now. And I don't have super high expectations that there's going to be lots and lots of super positive messages coming out, but what I hope for is that it becomes a jumping off point for lots of other individual discussions amongst Secretary Yellen, Secretary Raimondo, Secretary of State Blinken, with their counterparties on the Chinese side, so that over the coming months and year, we can continue to make advances in terms of the relationship between our two countries. And I think the world wants to see the U.S. and China in a stable place in terms of our relationship.
So I have to ask, as executive chairman, and when you were CEO and co-chair, put all the titles together, you get into rooms we don't get to go, Alan. So I'm curious what you're hearing in those rooms, anything that's on your radar you'd want to put on ours in terms of how business leaders or policymakers are thinking about the current environment.
Well, today I've been in the room with 6 different world leaders who represented the Apec nations, and there's a great deal of enthusiasm. I think they're excited to be here and getting together. I think that people are feeling a little bit of a sigh of relief that the economies around the world have held up better than I think people forecasted 9 to 12 months ago, where it appeared to be very doom and gloom. I think there's a general consensus that inflation is starting to get under control in most of the world. We're seeing less supply chain issues. We're starting to see commodity prices drop, and I'm certainly hopeful. And my talking to world leaders today and CEOs, I think there's a sense that we're going to see central banks near the finish line in terms of interest rate hikes.
No more rapid rate hikes, perhaps?
I'd certainly no rapid ones, and hopefully we're near the top of where we're going to be. And I think that by itself, if we could see interest rates be kind of capped and maybe look at them potentially coming down a little bit over time, is also going to make people feel good and bolster consumer confidence around the world. Is
there anything else you're keeping your eye on? I don't know if it's either serendipitous things you've discovered here, but obviously there's many things we haven't talked about: sustainability, etc., AI, many themes that are emerging here and elsewhere. What do you think we should keep our eye on? Because you also have insights into data we don't get to see.
So I'm certainly very hopeful to see more advances in digital trade. Digital trade requires global interoperability. It requires data sharing. It requires global standard adoption versus local standard adoption. It requires that we move away from data localization in certain markets. And I think that US, Mexico, Canada agreement has a very good framework on digital trade. Singapore, Australia are countries that have done a good job, and I'd like to see digital trade continue to be advanced in some of the discussions. That certainly would be one of the things I'd be looking for.
I'd be remiss not to mention, after a very successful run as CEO, and you've been a leader, in many contexts, I read that you were going to be stepping down in 2024 as executive chairman. Any plans you'd want to share with us?
Well, I think it's nothing specific yet, but my view is I'm going to the next chapter, and I think part of that next chapter is giving back. That's giving back in terms of potentially helping other companies, giving back in terms of potentially doing a little bit of teaching, giving back in terms of spending more time with my wife of 40 years and my 5 children and my now 3 grandchildren who have sacrificed a lot, because for the most part over the last 20 years I've traveled much of the world and missed time with them. So all of those are things that are going to be priorities for me as I look ahead. But it's been the honor of a lifetime to lead Visa. It's a fantastic company. We talk about it, Brian McInerney, who's my successor, and I talk about together and with our employees that people should be very, very happy to work there. It's a real purpose-driven company that's making a difference in the world, and we're in the middle of lots of innovation, and the company's truly global, and all those things make it a very exciting place to work.
One last thing, if you don't mind, which is the geopolitical landscape. How is that impacting either your outlook or the habits that you're seeing of consumers?
Well, I think right now, I'm worried about it, I guess is the short answer. I think to date it hasn't greatly impacted consumers, but I worry downstream, Diane. For example, travel. Mm-hmm. Tourism is so important to many, many economies around the world, almost every economy, including the United States. But the Middle East is very dependent on tourism. Israel for sure, right? And Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi, and Eastern Europe's got to be feeling it a bit with the war right in their background in Ukraine. So as we had built some tremendous momentum coming out of COVID in terms of a recovery of travel, I worry that this could cause a little bit of a bump in the road. So far, it has not, but it's something we're watching very carefully.
Well, I hope we keep talking. That's the value of events like this, and thanks for talking to us.
Absolutely. Great to be with you. Thank you so much for the time.